So probably one of the best bites of the entire year is in the fall right now when fish are starting to chase bait. But if you're throwing topwaters like this, you might be throwing the wrong one. So in this video, I'm gonna show you some of my favorite topwaters and how I use them for different situations and how to capitalize on some of the best topwater bites of the entire year. And at the end of this video, I'm gonna break down my gear that I use to help you catch more topwater fish, because I see so many people missing fish on a topwater that they shouldn't be missing. So if you miss fish on a topwater, stick around at the end of this video and I will break all that down. So the reason that a topwater works so good in the fall is because there is bait fish pushing shallow everywhere. All across the country, bait fish are getting shallow because the water is cooling off, and you will soon have what's called a fall turnover, where the cooler water on the top falls to the bottom and the warmer water that was cooler on the bottom will come to the top. And so now the entire water column is becoming about the same temperature, so those bait fish can go anywhere, and they choose shallow because that water is cooling off the fastest. And so what do those bass do? They go right up there with them. And so while they're chasing them, there is constantly bait fish flickering and popping across the surface everywhere. I know you guys see it, and you see fish blowing up on it everywhere. And so what a topwater does is it mimics bait fish fleeing perfectly. But again, not all of them are created equal. So I have 3 different topwaters that I like to throw for 3 different situations, in which I will break down right now. So sitting in front of me, I have the 4 best topwaters for fall bass fishing, and I'm gonna break each one of them down individually as to where I like to throw them and why I like to throw them. And people think of spooks and they think of topwaters, and I think there's only a couple different kinds, but there's a lot of different categories within each type of topwater. And so the first one is topwater spooks. These are 2 6-cent spooks. This is the Catwalk. You've seen me throw it many, many times on the channel. And this is the Dogma. And these are my 2 go-to topwaters in the fall. And I'll show you the difference. The Catwalk has a more V-shaped body, and it actually has a pointed style nose, which is like your traditional spook. However, the way it's weighted, it actually sits in the water about halfway, and so when it's calm out, this is what I really like to throw, especially when I'm still trying to call those fish up, but I don't want to overwork the bait. This is going to be a nice glide on the surface. It's going to be a nice sleek presentation. And if you're fishing for spotted bass and smallmouth, they don't pop it out of the water as much because it sits down in the water a little bit more. That's why it's my go-to. The Dogma, on the other hand, has more of your traditional spook floating, where it sits out of the water more, and it has a cupped mouth. And so what that means is every time you work it, it's going to throw water, and it's going to splash a little bit more. And so the difference in the 2 and when I like to throw them is this one I like in calmer conditions, where there's no chop on the water, nice calm water. This one I like if there's a little more overcast, there's more chop, where those fish are going to have to find or work a little harder to find the bait. That's when I'm going to go to the Dogma, because it's going to sit a little bit higher. It's going to call those fish up a lot better. Now, if you're fishing around isolated cover, say you have holes in the grass, say you have some laydowns, say you have rock piles that you want to throw over those specific isolated targets. A popper is just a great topwater as a follow-up bait for other topwaters, or if you have these isolated targets. This is the 6 cents model as usual. I will have it linked down below along with the other topwaters that I've been talking about today. But this one, you can walk it in place extremely well, and it has that cup mouth where it's still going to throw a little bit of water. And so that's what I like to do when I'm throwing over top of those isolated spots, just to keep that topwater working as much as possible in that one little area, to give those fish as much of a chance and to give me as much of a chance to call those fish up as physically possible. Now this one is not technically a topwater, but this is the Z-Man Streaks. So this one is a topwater adjacent bait. This is a fluke style bait, but when you work it fast enough, it skips across the surface just like a topwater. And so you see this a lot down south when guys are fishing for spotted bass, or when you're fishing for smallmouth that are schooling, because you can work it so extremely fast and then kill it when they get there. And so this is what I really like to throw on those high sun, flat, calm days where it is hard to get a topwater bite. This is what I'm going to throw. And I will have the gear that I like to throw it on linked down below as well, because I have very specialized gear that I like to throw a fluke like this on. And if you want to check out how I rig different flukes like this, I will have another video linked down below as to how to rig it. So when it comes to topwater fishing, you have to know your audience. And by your audience, I mean the fish you are physically fishing for and what they are feeding on. If you live in a lake with alewives or smaller bait fish, smaller topwaters are probably gonna be your best friend, throwing topwaters that mimic the size of the bait. That being said, if you live in a body of water that has big gizzard shad, do not be afraid to throw bigger topwaters. Because if you throw those bigger topwaters, it's gonna do the same thing that a big swim bait's gonna do. It's gonna appeal to bigger fish and potentially give you the opportunity at bigger fish. The smaller ones will appeal to the masses, but if you're a tournament angler, you need to be throwing something that's gonna trigger those bigger fish. It will also make your topwater stand out among a crowd of small bait fish. We've all seen it where you're seeing thousands and thousands of that young of the year bait, and then a school of big gizzards comes through, and what's behind it? Big largemouth, because that's what they are looking for. So I really quickly also want to touch on my topwater setup, because I see so many guys missing fish on topwaters, and they don't need to be missing fish on a topwater, because it's a finite gear that I throw these on that I've really spent a lot of time dialing to where my hookup ratio to land ratio is almost 100%. If they get this hook, I'm gonna catch them. And so the rod that I like to throw is actually a crankbait style rod. It's a 7-foot composite style rod where it is meant for throwing square bills and throwing crankbaits, because it loads up so slow that I dummy proof it for me. Because if you're like me, when those fish blow up on that topwater, I am trying to set the hook on them. And if you have a fast reactive rod, you're gonna pull that topwater away from those fish like 90% of the time. And so if you have a slower style rod with a high speed reel, at like an 8-to-1 gear ratio reel, then that helps you make up the ground. Because what I pair that with is Cortland Master braid. And when I'm fishing these style topwaters, I fish it on 30 pound. And so that is a super smooth castable braid that I can bomb basically the entire spool on that Arc G5 and that 8-to-1 gear ratio, which again, I'll have linked down below. So if you're struggling with your topwater setups, get this setup linked down below and you will catch more topwater fish. So one big thing I want to touch on when you're fishing a topwater is how you work the bait. That seems to be one of the hardest things for people to grasp, because when they throw a spook out or they throw a topwater out, they want to just twitch, twitch, and get that nice rhythmic twitch back and forth. And a lot of times that will catch fish. But what I really like to do in the fall, when all those bait fish are constantly going everywhere, you got to make it stand out. And so I'll go real fast, slow it down, might one twitch it, pause it a little bit, twitch it really fast. You want to make it look a little bit different than the other 800,000 bait fish that are around where you happen to be fishing. And so you have to mix up your retrieve almost just like you would mix up a jerk bait. But this way, when you're throwing it, it's going to be darting in and around the surface. And so you have to make it look like a bait fish that is really trying to get it away. And so you're going to have to vary it depending on how your fish are wanting it. The cool part is when you're mixing that retrieve up, a lot of times it'll cue you in on how they like it. So you might be twitching it really fast and all of a sudden they come unglued on it. And that lets you know, hey, I need to twitch it a little bit faster, versus you might be twitching it really fast and then all of a sudden you slow it down to a nice one back and forth, and then they blow up on it. You might even pause it and have those fish blow up on it. But the key is to mix it up, because when bait fish are trying to get away, they don't just do the same thing always. They're always darting and diving and scurrying around. And so that's what you need to be doing with your topwater bait when you're getting around these fish. Now, if you find yourself in a pod of fish where there is all kinds of fish in this one group, a lot of times you just got to get it over their heads, and then they're just going to eat it no matter what. So it kind of changes depending on the situation you're in, but mixing up your retrieve is never a bad idea. So one of the last topwaters that I like to use in the fall when I'm fishing these open water situations is going to be a small popper. And the reason I like fishing a small popper is when you get around isolated grass patches, you get around specific holes in the grass, or just specific targets in general, or if you just happen to find a group of fish and they stop eating the other topwaters, sometimes it can be a great option to throw a popper in there and just slowly work it over their heads, because A, it allows it to hold it in that position for a lot longer, so I can fish isolated spots for a ton longer. I can leave it sit there as long as I want, and then I can also just hold it over those fish for a lot longer and give them more of an opportunity. So if you get cold fronts in the morning, you know, if you get, again, pressured fish in a small area, or you're fishing isolated targets, that's when I really like to break out that popper to maximize on those spots. The one thing that I really figured out when it came to topwater fishing is that the biggest fish are gonna come up because it is their most vulnerable place. If you think about it, for a fish to come up near the surface, that's where everything can get them. Other fish can get them from below, and birds can get them from the top. And so only the biggest and and strongest fish generally are going to be the ones that come up on a topwater. And that's why I started gluing a topwater in my hand, because I found when I go over my areas that I love to fish, instead of throwing your swim baits, your chatter baits, your jerk baits, where I was catching a lot of small fish and potentially blowing up the area, I would make a couple casts through those areas with this topwater and really get some of the biggest fish I thought in that general area compared to other things I was throwing. I also love it over top of grass beds in clear water situations, because I figured out I could cover water like I would with a chatterbait or with a swim bait, but now I can do it over the surface and those fish suspend in that grass, and I could call them up really, really easily and get to throw big line, big rod, and still catch a ton of fish, doing something that is absolutely way more fun than anything else by throwing some of these topwater spooks. So if that applies to your bodies of water, or if that applies to you, and you're always constantly fighting with smaller fish or fighting with grass, try throwing a topwater over those situations and let me know how that works out for you. All right, guys, so we are going to end in the good book as always, and today we are in the book of Psalms. This is Psalms 49 and 50, and this is God talking to the world. He says, I speak, O Israel, I will testify against you. I am God, your God. Not for your sacrifices do I rebuke you. Your burnt offerings are continually before me. I will not accept a bull from your house or goats from your fields. For every beast of the forest is mine, the cattle on 1,000 hills. I know all the birds of the hills, and all that moves in the field is mine. If I were hungry, I would not tell you, for the world and its fullnesses are mine. Do I eat the flesh of bulls, or do I drink the blood of goats? Offer to God a sacrifice of thanksgiving, and perform your vows to the Most High, and call upon me in the days of your trouble, and I will deliver you, and you shall glorify me. I love that specific passage, because back in the day, everybody was giving him offerings, right? They were like, I offer you this, I offer you this, I offer you this. But everything is already his. It's like somebody taking your pair of shoes and then giving them to you later and been like, I got these shoes for you, when they're your shoes, right? And so he says, don't offer basically things that are already his to him. Instead, call upon him when you're troubled. You know, follow through on your vows to him. You know, if you said you're not going to watch internet porn, don't watch internet porn. If you said you're going to treat your neighbors as your brother or as you would want to be treated yourself, treat them that way. And when you're struggling, when you are really struggling, when you do fall back into sin, call upon him. That's what he wants from you. That's what he wants from every single one of us, to try to honor your word, because that's something he doesn't own. You know, offer your word and mean it. And then when you feel like you can't take any more, throw it up to him. That's what he's looking from every single one of us. So if you guys haven't already, be sure to hit that subscribe button to follow on with the regular content. But God bless every single one of you guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I can't wait to see you guys in the next video.